Today, we're going to talk about the foundations of branding for musicians and why they're so important to get right. First off, how it all started for me was my brother sending home this cheap $30 guitar he found in New York. And he found it at this little shop, shipped it home to us, and I started playing on that little guitar. Didn't know what I was doing. I remember one day I was just playing on it and trying to tune it, and I broke one of the strings because I tuned it too tight. That's how much I knew about all this stuff. And but that's what kicked it off. This is an album that my friends in high school and I did. We were called The Neighbors Upstairs, and that's me up there in the corner. And then these pictures are from when we went down to Texas for school for music. I got a degree in commercial music down there, which was like the business side of music. If you wanted to go to Nashville or to LA, here's some skill sets that you might need to pursue music there. It wasn't a traditional music program where you learn about Bach and Mozart and all those throughout the duration of your course. This was more like performance, live performance, and learning how to do video production, audio production, things like that. So we moved home. That's a picture of me playing at Valor down in Provo. Then I decided to go back to school for visual communications. That's for my senior seminar right there. And while I was sitting in one of my classes in my coursework there, I started learning about this idea called brand strategy, and I'd never heard of that before. And when I started understanding what it was, it just completely blew my mind. And I wish I knew what that was when I was pursuing music more seriously, 5 years prior to that, before we moved home from Texas. But got into the corporate world, started learning more about how brand functions in business, and started taking those ideas and applying them to the music world. So they're very similar, but there's nuances to both. How you approach branding for corporate versus branding for musicians. And that's how came to this realization that, man, I wish I knew this. I think we can help other people learn how to use it. And realize that musicians need to learn how to use branding. And then when I started looking more and more into the field of what people were doing, I realized musicians really need to learn how to use branding. So that's when Tetrimuse was born, this whole concept, and I started trying to learn how to articulate it, how to distill it down in a way that's easily digestible for people who don't know what branding is, right? And that's taken a long time. It seems so simple now when we talk about it, but when I was starting down this path, it took a while to learn how to really condense it in a way that was easy to understand. Okay, so why do musicians need branding? That's the big question, right? Do you know or have any idea what this number is referenced to? 100 million. That's how many Spotify tracks there are. And it's a sobering number. When I started doing some math to this, so in 100 years, there's 52,596,000 minutes. If you divide that by the average length of a song, it's just 3.5, that equals, any guesses? Anyone want to take a guess? 15,027,428 songs per 100 years. So, which means that about 15%, if you listen to songs every day of your life, all day long, for 100 years, you would only be able to listen to 15% of the amount of tracks on Spotify. It's kind of sobering, right? When you think about it from a musician's perspective. So I like to say, it's like you're a literal drop in the ocean. And one of the things I want to talk about too is that there's this big frenzy going on with brand and with the music industry. Marketing, branding, creating product. There's a lot of information out there that's trying to get people to get playlisted on Spotify or learn how to market their music. And to me, it feels very like a frenzy that's going on because it's overwhelming. when you're a musician and you're trying to go after the market and try to get people to listen to your music. There's so much information and so many things that you feel like you have to do, it feels overwhelming. And I believe what's happening is a lot of the musicians I'm talking to are getting discouraged because what they're hearing is I got to go out and I got to try and get playlisted on Spotify. I got to have 1 million views in order to make $1,000. It's so big. It seems so daunting. And what I'm seeing happen is that musicians are trying these things. They're not having any success. So they're getting discouraged because they're like, well, I'm putting all this work in and nothing's happening with my music. Got no traction. You hear about branding all the time now. And in some ways I love it because branding wasn't so well known 5-10 years ago. But all of a sudden these new influencers are talking about brand and it's starting to become this buzzword. So this is how I feel about it. Branding is so hot right now. I don't know if you've ever seen Zoolander, but
What's that?
I hear people talk. Zoolander is a movie.
Is that the guy who played on Elf in there?
Yeah, it was. Actually, he's funny in that movie. So, brand. You hear a lot of people talk about brand as a feeling, and I actually disagree with this. I don't believe brand is a feeling. So, what is a brand? What do you guys think a brand is? This is how I articulate brand. Branding in 2024 equals community and culture building.
Like that. I saw that in your material.
Did you? So let's talk about it from a literal perspective and an emotional perspective, because literal is very much what you're talking about. A differentiator where they would mark their cattle or their product so that they knew it belonged to a particular person, right? That's a literal way of marking something. So if you look at the literal, you can consider that the logos, the colors, the photos, the graphics, the identifiers that go along with the brand. Then there's the emotional side, which covers the values, the morals, the product experience, and communications. So piggybacking off of what you're talking about, if there's Joe and Bob's beef, right? And they may use a mark to identify which beef is whose, that'd be the literal. The emotional would be Joe's beef is better than Bob's beef, right? The experience I have eating it or using his cattle is, I have a better experience with that. So how do you create that experience, right? So I define brand as a set of values represented by a form of outward expression, visually and verbally, that portray what is culturally significant to you and the communities you interact with. Now, cultural significance is a term I've come up with to describe how you fit in a marketplace. And I'll kind of talk about this a little bit more as we go. These two albums are a good way to show cultural significance. When you think about Metallica and you think about Taylor Swift, they look and feel very different. They also sound very different. But they're also targeting a very different culture of people. So when we start talking about cultural significance, it becomes really important because you need to identify what culture of people that you're talking to in order to create visuals that align with what is significant to that group of people. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, building a culture and community around your art is the long game. This is something that is theoretical. This is a theory. But I believe this is something people don't like to hear because what people want, they want quick results. They want it to go viral really quickly. And what I'm trying to do is to help people learn how to connect with what we call true fans. And a true fan is somebody who will spend $100 a year on your product. And if you can get 1,000 of those, you can make a pretty good income. But what's happening in the marketplace is that a lot of people want to go viral and have a lot of reach and streams, but I don't think that's going to have the same effect as people that are deeply invested into your music or your art. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a way to connect with true fans, because you don't have to have the scale and volume that you would need for streaming. You can create a lot of impact. That's what I'm trying to say with a smaller group of people that you influence. So when we look at the product to market, you have your song or your recording, then you have the artist development. And I think those two can go back and forth. You don't have to have one before the other, but those two kind of go hand in hand. And then you have your brand development, asset development, which would be your visual communications, and then your marketing and distribution. So branding is important because it's involved in every step, because it equals communication. Back in the day, and it still applies for the big artists now, but back in the day when you had the record labels in their heyday, they were really good at creating a brand and marketing strategy that would take musicians from product to market. Essentially, if you heard the term break the artist, we're going to break the artist. That means they put enough resources into it, get enough eyeballs on it to make them become a superstar. So they were really good at that, but the problem is that the revenue split up like a pie and it wasn't super great for the artist. The artist didn't get a lot of that money. Now, if they were a superstar, they did get a ton of money, but typically, and I would say the majority of artists didn't ever recoup from the investment that the record labels put into it, so they never really had financial success. Now, if we fast forward to today, we have so many different independent distribution options like TuneCore, CD Baby, DistroKid, I think is one of them. They're really great because you can hop on there and you can put your song on it and then they distribute it for you onto Spotify and platforms like that. The great thing is this gives you more control as an artist and more revenue, but the drawback is that typically I find that musicians have a lack of expertise when it comes to the brand and market side. And it's also hard to scale because they're typically doing it themselves. So I think I already said that previously, but so most people, they think of this, they think of the brands, it goes beyond just the logo and the colors. It goes through the product experience and it goes through the emotional tie that we have with the culture that's attached to the brand as well. And I like to think of branding like a cake. So when you start thinking about how to develop your brand, I like to think of it like this, where the icing could equal the aesthetics or the visual portion of the brand, and the shape of the cake would equal your values, purpose, mission, etc. So those play a major role on what the icing will look like and taste like as it takes the form of the cake. So imagine you have a cake, you build it out, and then the icing just takes the form of the cake itself. But really, I look at brand as the cake and the icing as a whole, but that part that most people think about is just the icing, the aesthetics. They think of photography and they think of graphics. But what we're going to focus on is we're going to dive into the cake portion, which is the strategy for the brand. So the question is what kind of cake are you? Now, this is where we're going to get into the worksheet, and we can kind of just talk through that.